The Barbarian Betrayal, Chapters 46 and Epilogue. The Last Goodbye. What Admiral Otsoa was attempting had never been tried before, not under real-world conditions. They had received training on it over the years, but it had almost been perfunctory. No one had been able to imagine a scenario where it might actually prove useful, not until now. It was a gamble, and she knew it, but safe and sane had stopped being considerations days ago. Now it was about survival. Whatever the cost. Adjust your course to 032 by Mark 291, she ordered the fleet, taking them even closer to the planet as the machine fleet moved to close the distance. She smiled thinly, pleased that they weren't backing off. And why would they? They were much less susceptible to gravity and other constraints than the biological life forms they were planning to wipe out. Perhaps they saw this as their best chance to end the battle, once and for all. Time to show them otherwise, Adelaide mused as their lead ships began to glow, feeling the convective heating of Juja's atmosphere. The battleships, cruisers, and destroyers screamed in protest as they clawed through the air, banking hard as they managed a much tighter turn than would have been possible in space. The aerogravity assist had been introduced to the Tetrarchy fleet by none other than Field Marshal Kwasi Antuma himself, and Otsoa was gratified she could honor the great man by using his tactic at last. "Make that turn tighter, goddammit!" she snarled, as the fleet fought for every spare Newton of Delta V the radical maneuver would allow, the sound of shrieking metal reverberating through the corridors of every vessel in the fleet. Some of her ships, already damaged during the long-running battle, disintegrated under the strain, exploding in balls of eye-searing plasma, but Admiral Otsoa held her course. Had anyone on the ground observed them, it would have been an incredible sight. Hundreds of fire trails streaking across the sky, a continuous rolling wave of sonic booms as they blasted through the heavens. The machine fleet had calculated their enemy's flight path down to the last meter. They knew exactly when and where they would find their prey. The sudden appearance of Admiral Otsoa and her ships exploding out of the atmosphere showed them the error of their calculations. The Alliance fleet howled in triumph as they tore into the machine's flanks, shredding their formation to pieces. Another reverberating thrum echoed through the tunnels as the team raced into the depths of the labyrinth, seeking the enemy ships they'd spotted prior to the ambush. Greybird's instruments swore they were near, but they ground to a halt as they came out into a massive cavern, with hundreds of ships surrounding them in every direction. Yet another pulse sent shockwaves through air, spurring them forward, as Tango pointed to the craft nearest to them. "No time to be picky," she growled, as they made a beeline for the enemy vessel. It only took a few moments to gain access. Apparently, the machines had a somewhat lax attitude when it came to security, followed by several more minutes of forced idleness as Musashi and Greybird worked out the controls. "Got it!" their pilot shouted as the ship's engines came to life. Musashi grabbed the controls and lifted the craft into the air as Tango loomed over his shoulder. "Find the power plant," she ordered, even as they were buffeted by yet another seismic rumble. "They're coming faster now," she said grimly, "which means we're running out of time." "On it," Musashi nodded as Greybird brought navigation and weapons online. A quick scan of the schematics pointed them in the right direction, even as they spotted machines appearing from the tunnels, racing for the other craft. "Scratch that! Make a pass over the flight line first," she snapped. "We can't let them take to the sky." Musashi slewed the ship around as Greybird brought up the energy weapons. Aiming was almost a moot point. As tightly packed as the craft were where a shot anywhere was bound to hit something. But they were professionals above all else, and randomly spraying the machine aerodrome with fire offended them on an almost visceral level. Which is why the almost razor-straight line of explosions they left in the wake was so gratifying. "That should slow them down," Tango grinned, as another of the cascading shockwaves sent metallic vibrations through their teeth. Musashi threaded the ship through the cavern, with Greybird navigating him through the worst of it. Bring them to the power plant just a handful of minutes later. "Jesus," Tango whispered, as they stared at the writhing mass of bodies, clawing to get it. It was like watching an army of ants devour a carcass, and her features turned hard as she gave the order. Light 'em up." Giage's weapon barked again and again as the trio fought a tactical withdrawal. They'd blocked the entrances as best they could, but the trio had underestimated the sheer number of enemy hurling themselves at the walls, desperate to prevent the cascade failure from destroying all they'd built. Nasat slapped in a fresh magazine, firing into the mass of machines coming at them, while Whisper's axe cleaved again and again, sending machine parts flying in every direction. The Diaksh howled with the joy and rage of the berserker gong, while Whisper giggled and laughed with the manic glee of the insane. Nasat, however, remained silent, focusing instead on the task at hand, using what wits he still possessed to buy them enough time to finish the mission. The great structure rumbled with yet another shockwave, triggered by Whisper's bomb-induced cascade failure. They were coming faster now, and in greater strength and power, and only the massive edifice protected them from the worst of its effects. Though as each wave struck, the machines would screech and wobble, buying them much-needed time to fall back. Nasat had no idea why the machines were so affected, but he was glad for it. It was the only reason they were still alive. He reached for a fresh magazine and came up empty. "Giage!" he shouted, who barely spared him a glance as he threw him his own pistol. The Saurotor nearly fumbled the catch, using up precious seconds before he finally gripped the unfamiliar weapon and began pulling the trigger once more. It was a stopgap, for there was no way they could keep this up for much longer. And as for escape, that was no longer an option. Nasat was still certain of that, when the power plant was suddenly bathed with white-hot flame. "Faster!" Tychist screamed, all but dragging his sister through the tunnels as they began to shake and tremble. The strange rumbling had grown worse as they journeyed back to the surface, so much so that he feared the maze they were scurrying through was in danger of collapse. Chekla stumbled, gripping her brother's arm for support as they ran for their lives. They hadn't seen a machine since they'd begun their mad sprint to freedom, and thank the Creator for that. But she couldn't help feeling their absence was an ominous sign in its own right. The ground lurched beneath their feet, sending them sprawling, before they both staggered back to their feet and began running once again. She longed to stop and catch her breath, to drink from her water supply, but there was no time. No time for anything but the race to survive. "There!" her brother shouted with elation, pointing at a dim glow far ahead. "We're almost out!" Chekla squinted, almost afraid to believe Tychist spoke the truth, but as he twins drew nearer she could see for herself they had made it, despite the long odds against them. "Thank the Creator," she whispered, her energy all but spent, as she struggled to keep up with her siblings' gallop in the final stretch, as the ground suddenly gave way beneath her hooves. Chekla screamed in terror, her stomach lurching as she fell, only to be yanked up short as Tychist grabbed her arm to stop her plunge. He gritted his teeth, his every muscle straining with the effort as he inched his way back from the precipice that had opened up, digging in his hooves to drag her to safety. Her arm felt as if it was being torn from its socket, the other flailing wildly before it found purchase. Inch by inch he hauled her out of the chasm, gasping with the effort, even as the vibrations grew more violent around them. "Come on," he hissed, his body screaming in agony as he fought to save his sister's life, even as the surrounding terrain continued to collapse. Pits and crevasses were appearing all around them as Chekla's hooves finally found foothold once again. They stumbled and staggered, each dragging the other forward as the planet screamed and shook, before finally collapsing in exhaustion at the lip of the newly formed abyss. A machine craft exploded from the soil a mere heartbeat after, sending a shower of rock and dirt in every direction. It hung in the air for the briefest of instants, before it came crashing back down, finally coming to rest a few dozen meters away. The pair stared at the sight, and then held each other's hands as they watched the hatch slowly open. They'd lost their weapons during their escape, and when the machines piloting that craft came for them. "Tango?" Tychist said in disbelief, as the familiar face grinned back at them while she climbed out from the wreckage. "Tango!" he shouted in delight, as he and his sister staggered over to greet her. She grabbed them both in a massive hug, holding them tight, refusing to let go. "God damn, it's good to see you two," she said, her voice filled with emotion. "And you," Chechla whispered, her eyes widening as she spotted other figures emerging from the ruined ship. "Father?" she asked, filled with sudden hope as she looked up to her mentor. But then Tango turned away and closed her eyes. "Sorry, kid," she whispered. Chechla felt the ground collapse beneath her once more, though the seismic waves had ceased. "Father!" she screamed in grief and anguish. It should be raining, Chechla thought, as she looked over the gathered crowd. Why is it not raining? Her brother reached out and took her hand, sharing a private moment, as Leandra Singh rose from her chair and ascended the small dais, taking her place before the podium. "Friends, honored guests, I wish to thank you for coming today as we pay tribute to a great hero, someone who earned the respect of all who knew him, someone who, despite a lifetime of pacifism, took up arms to defend his home and way of life, someone I came to call friend, and whose courage and integrity left me forever humbled. I refer, of course, to General Nasat, the hero of 3 wars. A hush fell over the throng, a mass of bodies that spread out in every direction. Leandra turned to look at the twins, as well as the individual seated beside them. It is perhaps fitting that on this day, as we honor Nasat, we also celebrate the signing of the constitutional amendment admitting the Konim race as full partners in the Tetrarchy. A smile came to her face. For Nasat was someone who believed in peace above all else. That we have finally put an end to the conflicts we have waged for so long, I know in my heart, this would have brought him joy. Chechla glanced at the woman to her left, Chikij Kaujak, formerly the deputy Diaksh, now the first Konhim minister. There was no way she could be as calm as she appeared, the young Sorator was certain of that, but then she was a politician, long practiced in concealing her true emotions. If there is any comfort to be found on this day, she continued, perhaps it is in the knowledge that Nasat did not face the end alone, for at his side stood his comrade in arms, a man he once called his enemy, the Diaksh Jiaj Gu Yaz. This time Chechla did see the Konhim woman react, her pain suddenly as real and as palpable as her own. The pair met in battle many years ago, Leandra went on, and despite that found common cause. I have no doubt they faced the end as they lived, with courage and a refusal to surrender. She took a moment to gather herself before motioning to the twins. The children of General Nasat are here today to unveil his monument, she told the crowd, as the twins stepped forward. And I know that he is here with us in spirit, watching over us, just as he always has. Chechla gripped the rope leading to the drapery tightly, taking a deep breath as she gave it a firm tug. The cloth fell away, revealing a bronze statue on a marble base. Her eyes suddenly wet as she saw the image of her father, dressed not in his uniform, but the prayer robes she always associated with him. She felt Taichist's presence at her side as the twins bowed their heads and said goodbye. Father would have hated it, Chechla said quietly, many hours later. He would, Taichist agreed. He always shunned the spotlight, even before Mother's death. And the statue, somehow he managed a wry grin. I think it would have horrified him. A wet sob and laugh burst from his sister's chest. It would, wouldn't it? She got out. Even though it is a good likeness. She smiled for a moment, and then looked away. I miss him, she whispered. As do I, her brother agreed, taking her hand, before suddenly turning to her. Do you think he was proud of us? At the end? He asked. Chechla slowly faced him. I do, she said at last. Thank God that's over, Leandra sighed as she led her guest into her office. I never cared for funerals, especially for someone like Nasat. She went to the sideboard and began to pour. But that isn't the reason I wanted to speak with you. It feels strange, Chikij Kaujak admitted, looking around, as though I were an interloper in this place. Leandra cackled as she handed the newly ordained Konhim minister a glass. I know exactly how you feel, she chuckled, taking a seat across from her. 30 years and I still catch myself asking, what the hell am I doing here? They sipped their drinks in silence for a moment, until Chikij spoke up once more. Prime Minister, while I am grateful for all you have done to weld our races together, I find myself fearing what comes next. There are many out there, your people and mine, who remain unconvinced joining the Konhim to the Tetrarchy is wise. Many on both sides who believe it to be a mistake and will fight this new union to their dying breath. You're right to be worried, Leandra nodded. The road ahead will not be an easy one. The old triumvirate types are still squawking over humanity taking a place beside them, and given the blood spilled on both sides these many years, she spread her hands, encompassing everything around them. It's going to be an uphill fight, every step of the way. She drained her glass, setting it aside, and then rose to her feet. Thankfully, it's not my problem anymore, she smirked. The Konhim blinked. What? She said in disbelief and horror. What are you saying? I'm saying I'm done, Chickage, Leandra sighed. 30 years I've held this post, and that was 30 years too long. But it was necessary, important even. I've fulfilled my role and done what I came to do. What lies ahead, cementing the Konhim people into this society, that's a job for my successor. Her head spun wildly at this revelation. But who will lead the people now? She asked. How will we even choose your successor? Who is best qualified? How? She sputtered as Leandra raised her hand. Don't worry. I'm not about to dump a succession crisis in your lap as my final act, she smiled. It's all been taken care of, even if I did have to twist a few arms. The grin on her face grew even wider, and the twinkle in her eye was unmistakable. Then who? Chickage demanded, only to come to a screeching halt as Leandra began to snicker. Her eyes went wide as Singh's private joke finally landed. You cannot be serious, she whispered. This is madness! I cannot be Prime Minister! That's where you're wrong, Leandra corrected her. It has to be you. There's no way they'd accept another human at the helm, not after the way I've run roughshod over them for so long. But by the same token, it can't be one of the old triumvirate races either. Hell, the Ronin are still reeling from all that's happened. And as for the Ophipterans and Sauratar, if it was up to them, their first act would be to tear up the amendment we just signed and send your race packing. A forlorn look came over her as she stared off into the distance, which would mean war again. She sighed and looked back at her counterpart. We can't afford another war, Chickage. None of us can. The next one would destroy all we have built, and I've worked too damn hard, been through too damn much to let that happen. The Konhim minister, Prime Minister, suddenly felt as if the universe was closing in around her. I'm not ready, she whispered. You're ready, Leandra smiled. And if not, you've got about an hour before we make the announcement to get ready. But, what am I supposed to do? She wailed. Well, if you want my advice, Leandra said in conspiratorial tones, put them to work coming up with a new name for the government. Chickage just stared at her. What? She asked flatly. Singh smirked. It's perfect. Just the kind of nonsense to keep them occupied while you get some real work done. Besides, you can't keep calling it the Tetrarchy. And if you go with Quintum Virate or some such, what happens if someday someone else wants to join? She chuckled at that. I lean towards Confederation myself, but in the end it doesn't matter what you call it. Just make sure that it works. Leandra reached out and placed a hand on her arm. I didn't make this decision lightly, Chickage. I chose you for a reason. She swallowed and bowed her head. I wish Giage were here, she said softly. I miss his counsel. He'd be the first one to tell you to accept the post, Leandra replied. He'd hate it, of course, but he knew a good deal when he saw one. She sighed once more. I wouldn't worry too much about the old triumvirate. It's Earth you'll need to keep an eye on. I may have shown Helene Fujimoto the door, but she's not done yet. Expect her to be the focal point for whatever opposition party we humans come up with. And while you're at it, make sure you keep Governor Sabolchi on a short leash. He's still on the fence, and it wouldn't take much for him to fall back into old habits. You would betray your own people? Chickage said in shock. I have had much bigger concerns than just Earth for a long time, she pointed out. We sink or swim together. Never forget that, especially when the Konhim start pushing you to take full control and settle some old scores. Because they will. Count on it. She flashed the Konhim a grin. Worst come to worst. pull a weapon on them. It worked for me. Chickid shook her head, taking a long, calming breath before slowly rising to her feet. Prime Minister, a part of me thanks you for all you have done, she said quietly. And the other part? Leandra prompted. For the first time, Chickid Kaujach chuckled. That part wants to beat you senseless. Singh guffawed. Now I know I made the right choice, she grinned, taking her by the arm. Time to face your adoring fans, Prime Minister. Leandra smirked as she led her towards the great hall. No words were spoken as the trio made their way up the small rise. As they arrived at the top, Tango unslung the pack she was carrying, gazing out across the valley below. Hell of a view, Musashi murmured. Yeah, she agreed softly before fishing a bottle out of her ruck and passing it to Greybird. He took the proffered spirits and cracked the seal, taking a healthy swig before handing it off. Tango removed the brass urn from her pack as Musashi took a long pull of whiskey, wiping his sleeve across his lips as she walked to the cliff's edge. She unscrewed the lid and poured out the ceremonial ashes contained within, watching them fall before the wind carried them away. She felt a nudge at her side, pulling her from her reverie, turning to see Musashi offering her the bottle. Tango passed the urn off to Greybird before taking the proffered drink, letting the liquid fire slide down her throat. Greybird resealed the empty vase as Tango closed her eyes, holding the bottle out, upending it and pouring the rest of the whiskey on the ground. The three old warriors stood in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. Tango finally stuffed the empty bottle back in her ruck, taking the urn from Greybird and shoving it inside as well. She stood gazing off in the distance as her teammates shared a glance, before turning and heading back the way they'd come, leaving her in solitude. Tango wasn't sure how long she remained at that spot, but finally she sighed, adjusting her pack as she took one last look at the horizon. See you around, Whisper, she said softly, before turning away from the cliff and walking back down the bluff to rejoin her comrades. The end.